여러분 안녕하십니까? 2022 평창 평화 포럼 첫 번째 경제 세션에 함께해 주신 모든 분들 진심으로 환영합니다. 저는 오늘 포럼의 진행을 맡은 아나운서 박세정입니다. 반갑습니다. 네, 바쁘신 일정에도 불구하고 함께해 주신 모든 분들께 깊은 감사의 말씀을 드립니다. 그리고 온라인으로 참여해 주고 계신 국내외의 다양한 분들께도 깊은 감사의 말씀을 전해 드립니다. 자, 그럼 지금부터 2022 평창 평화 포럼 첫 번째 경제 세션을 시작하겠습니다. 이번 세션의 주제는 2024 강원 동계 청소년 올림픽을 통한 남북 관광 실현과 수익 모델입니다. 이번 토론회는 님과 그리고
We have one moderator, two speakers, and two designated panelists. Let me introduce our distinguished moderator. We have with us Professor Lee Joohyong of Kyonggi University. Please welcome him with a big round of applause.
안녕하세요.
Good morning.
세션에 좌장
As have been introduced, I am Lee Joohyong. I will be moderating this session.
소개하기 전에
Before I introduce the session itself,
두 분의
I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our two speakers and two panelists.
전체 세션을 잠깐 소개드리고
Then I will introduce our session overall, go on to our two presentations, followed by a panel discussion. Then, if time allows, we will accept questions from the floor.
먼저 연사 두 분 먼저 소개하겠습니다.
Let me introduce our speakers to you. We have our first speaker,
올림픽 지원 사업과 남북
who is going to talk about Gangwon 2024 and inter-Korean tourism, senior reporter Park Kyung-nam of the HANKYOREH media.
두 번째
And our second presenter,
평창 동
who will be talking about the PyeongChang Winter Olympics and inter-Korean tourism cooperation, we have with us Professor SHIM Sangjin of Kyunggi University. A big round of applause, please.
그 옆에 계시는 분은
And to his left, we have our first panelist, the very well-known
널리 알려주신 짐 라
Chairman Jim Rogers of Rogers Holdings. A big round of applause, please.
마지막으로 토의해 주
Last but not least, we have with us from Dongseo University, Professor Chuljin. A round of applause, please.
이번 세션은
During this session,
청소년 올림픽
we will be discussing the inter-Korean hosting of Gangwon 2024, as well as the supporting programs for countries without winter sports infrastructure.
취약국가 청소년 초청
We will be planning a program to train youth from countries without winter sports infrastructure, and this could actually possibly open the way for cooperation between the two Koreas, and airway and seaway between the two Koreas, which then later can be used as inter-Korean tour routes. North Korea has finished its preparation to welcome South Korean visitors and foreign tourists to their tourism areas, and we do believe that this could open a way for inter-Korean cooperation for sustainable tourism at the DMZ. We will first invite Mr. Park Kyung-nam, senior reporter at HANKYOREH Media, who will talk to us about the support programs for Gangwon 2024 as well as inter-Korean tourism. A round of applause, please.
안녕하십니까?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As introduced, I am Park Kyungman, a senior reporter at HANKYOREH Media.
오늘
In my presentation today, I'm going to be discussing support programs for Gangwon 2024 and inter-Korean tourism.
14년째 DMZ 접경 지역
For 14 years, I've been covering stories regarding the DMZ and the border area. And in 2018, at HANKYOREH newspaper, I had a series of articles about the border area. And at the end of last year,
지속 가능
I argued for sustainable development of the DMZ and the border area, and that was the thesis for my PhD degree.
제가 그동안에 취재를 해오고
As I said before, I've been studying the DMZ area and I've been reporting on that. So I'm going to share my experiences and my understanding with you. As the moderator already mentioned,
대주제가
the topic of the session is establishing inter-Korean tourism through Gangwon 2024, how we can utilize this important international sporting event to promote inter-Korean cooperation.
이 프로그램 여러 세션에서도 소개가 많이
This program has been introduced in many sessions already, but let me briefly go over the support program. There are many countries that do not have winter sports infrastructure, including countries in Southeast Asia and Africa. So we want to invite 250 young athletes from 50 countries and provide them with training opportunities in PyeongChang as well as Masingnyeong in northern Gangwon province.
지원 사업 훈련 장비 지원과
This support program is going to cost about $20 million, including training equipment and trainer-related costs. We have already secured funding for this program from the government and the Gangwon province, and the IOC agreed to provide support.
시작하는 것을 목표로
We are aiming to start this program starting from April this year.
지원 지난해
The support committee was established in June last year.
다음으로 이 지원 사업이
Now,
성공할 경우
if this support program becomes a success, what kinds of benefits can we get from this?
비행기나
First of all, the athletes from 50 countries will use the road, airways, and seaways to move between the two Koreas. So we have the road route from PyeongChang to Masingnyeong, and airway from Yangyang Airport to Wonsan-Kalma International Airport, and sea route from Sokcho Port to Wonsan Port. And if we open up these routes, these will later be utilized for tourist routes. And if this is the case, then we expect that there will be tourism facilitated between Wonsan and PyeongChang. When you look at the map, we have the southern Gangwon province and the northern Gangwon province. This is the only divided province on the Korean peninsula. The area,
약 150만
the southern province, is much larger than the northern Gangwon, but the population is similar.
이런
There was actually a precedent to this support program for Incheon Asian Games in 2014. At that time, there was the program called Vision 2014. This was a successful program.
그런 종목들을
This program aimed at promoting the recently adopted sports games for Asian Games, and at that time, this program was mainly about providing supplies and equipment. And at that time, the Incheon Mayor An Sang-soo
이 카드를 내밀어서
offered this program in his final presentation to host the Asian Games in 2014, and he was able to win this bid. And there was a similar program for PyeongChang Winter Olympic Games as well. This is actually an ongoing program to invite young athletes from countries that do not have winter sports infrastructure so that they can experience winter sports.
이런
I'd like to discuss the importance of this type of program.
문제를 극복할 수 있는
I believe that this is a program that will allow us to overcome the limitations and the constraints of the UN sanctions. And if we have this type of program, we will be able to exchange cheer groups and supporters, and these can later lead to inter-Korean tourism.
지금 앞에 와 계시는데
Here, you can see in the photo, the Governor Choi Moon-soon, he's actually here in this venue. And Governor Choi Moon-soon said that we need to build fine connections, as many connections as possible, to improve inter-Korean relations. In recent years, the governments have led inter-Korean relations, which have actually had negative impact on the inter-Korean relations. We need to utilize grassroots exchanges. And he said that Gangwon 2024 will be actually a very valuable opportunity to turn the tides around and promote inter-Korean cooperation and exchanges.
청소년 올림픽이 지원 사업이 잘
So if this 2024 Gangwon support program becomes successful, then we can utilize this format for the upcoming international sporting events, including 2029 Youth Asian Game co-hosting by Pocheon and Wonsan, and we can also win the bid for 2027 Winter Military World Games hosted by the two Koreas, and finally the co-hosting of 2036 Summer Olympic Games. Let me tell you about the German cases. They started sports exchanges in 1951, and they attended jointly the 1956 Melbourne Olympic Games, and also in 1960 and in 1964 they attended the Olympic Games under the same flag.
530의 경기가
And there were many exchanges of supporting events. However, in 1961 the Berlin Wall was erected.
1968년 멕시코 올림픽은
And for the Mexican Olympic Games in 1968, they participated separately as separate countries.
다음에는 40
As a result, the number of sports exchanges has decreased significantly from more than hundreds to 46 in 1968 and only 10 in 1970. However, in 1969, the Billy Brandt New East policy was announced, and the basic agreement was signed in 1972, and they promoted sports exchanges and they achieved unification in 1989. Therefore, it shows that the German history tells us that sporting exchanges is crucial, but at the same time, it is influenced by politics. Therefore, it is crucial to put together legal and institutional mechanisms to continue to support sports exchanges between the two Koreas. You can see Billy Brandt in this photo.
다음 스포츠
Let me now move on to discussing sports tourism. As you may know very well, sports tourism market has been expanding rapidly.
그냥 단순한
So nowadays, tourism is not just visiting some sightseeing scenes or some tourist attractions, but rather tourists want to engage in the local culture, and as part of that, sports tourism has become more popular.
같은 경우는
The Barcelona Football Museum is visited by so many visitors. Actually, it is number 3 in terms of the number of visitors, following the Familia Cathedral and the Guwol Park.
하나투어에서 유럽 축구 여행
Here in Korea, Hana Tour, which is a tourism agency, has been selling a Europe soccer trip to attend football games played by Son Heung-min and Tottenham.
이런 사업을 북한에 무엇을 볼 것인가? 북한에 가서
Now, if we open up tourism in North Korea, what can we do? And what is the situation over there on the northern side? During Kim Il-sung's era, they focused on heavy industries and they did not put emphasis on tourism. But during the Kim Jong-il reign, he decided to open up here and there in limited areas, and they started Geumgangsan Mountain tourism. And now with Kim Jong-un in power,
앞세우고 있고
he is promoting tourism to attract foreign tourists, and he regards tourism as one of the key industries in North Korea. As you can see on the left-hand side, this is the Wonsan-Kalma district.
김정은
Chairman Kim Jong-un visited Wonsan-Kalma district several times, which shows that he's very interested in this area. And the Masingnyeong ski resort and Baekdusan Mountain and Samjiyeon resort are main tourist attractions.
가장 최근 보고서인데요.
The most recent report we can take a look to understand the tourism industry in North Korea is the Voluntary National Review of 2021, which was submitted by North Korea to the UN.
이행에 관한
This is the voluntary national review on the implementation of 2030 agenda. And here, there is mentioning of tourism in North Korea.
원산갈마지구를 대한
In particular, you can understand that they have huge expectations for the Wonsan-Kalma area. And they argue that they have developed this area into a world-class tourist attraction. And you can find this on page 14. And you can also find mentioning about tourism on page 31, including the Masingnyeong ski resort. But tourism only accounts for a small portion of its GDP.
39쪽에 보도
And on page 39,
관계발을 장
you can see that the North Korean government is promoting tourism development, including Geumgangsan Mountain, Myohyangsan Mountain, Chilbosan Mountain, and they're promoting domestic tourism, and also they're developing and finalizing the Wonsan-Kalma Tourist District.
강원도가
And on page 39, it says that they are putting priority on Gangwon province for tourism. So this really shows that the North Korean regime puts emphasis on developing tourism industry in Gangwon province. Now moving on to the border area between North Korea and China. On the left-hand side, this is Baekdusan Mountain. On the right-hand side, it is the Amnokgang River. And they have introduced new visa-free tourism with China and Russia in 2010. And in 2018, more than 1.2 million Chinese tourists visited North Korea. And the train tickets between Dandung and Pyongyang were sold out really quickly.
방문했었습니다. 당시 시진핑이
And at that time, Xi Jinping said that they would increase the number of Chinese tourists to 5 million to North Korea. And if that becomes reality, then North Korea can overcome the constraints of the UN sanctions for economic revenue. And here is the border area between North Korea, China, and Russia. Since 2011, China and Russia and North Korea, there has been this connection or tripartite tourism. And there was also an international tourism route that connects between Hunchun, Rason, and Vladivostok.
이쪽 노선은 이제 청진까지도
And this route can go all the way to Chuljin, so this route has been expanding.
남북한 접경지역
Moving on to the border area between the two Koreas, Geumgangsan Mountain and the Kaesong Industrial Park.
중단돼
In 2008, the Geumgangsan tourism was suspended. But up until then, more than 1.9 million people visited Geumgang Mountain and 110,000 people visited Kaesong. And in 2018, the Pyongyang Joint Declaration states that the two Koreas would promote tourism in Kaesong and Geumgangsan Mountain, but no progress has been made since then.
DMZ 관광이
Let's now move on to the DMZ area tourism.
DMZ가 뭐 세계 유일의 분단 현장
As you may know, DMZ is
볼 수 있는데 동서
a divided area, and it is true that this is the only remaining legacy of the Cold War. Therefore, the DMZ can offer unique experiences for tourists.
매력적인
We can create this area and we can turn it into an area that offers very attractive and unique experiences, and this can become a symbol of reconciliation and coexistence.
역대 정부에서도 DMZ
In the previous administrations, there have been some initiatives and ideas to utilize the DMZ. Most recent one was proposed by President Moon Jae-in, who proposed the idea of turning the DMZ into an international peace zone. And here, we can list this area to the UNESCO jointly between the two Koreas, and we can install various UN-related organizations and peace and ecology and cultural organizations within the DMZ. And before that, Park Geun-hye administration proposed an idea of creating a peace park on the DMZ.
DMZ
So far, the DMZ has been a tourist destination for security. For instance, the underground tunnels or the observatories, these were tourist resources. and also some of the historical remnants of the Korean War were main attractions for tourists.
여기 보면 이제
But here, this is the Panmunjom.
관광객들이
On the right, you can see tourists looking at the North Korean side, and at the bottom, you can see North Korean tourists looking over to the south.
하지만 판문점 선언을 통
And with the Panmunjom Declaration, the demarcation line was crossed by the two leaders, and there is an expectation rising. And here on this walk bridge, there was this small talk between the leaders of the two Koreas.
인식이
Therefore, the DMZ can be now recognized as tourist resources for peace.
제가 그 두루미를
And I really like cranes.
두루미 그
So I'm not sure if you have seen cranes.
전시를 하고 있습니다.
And there's this digital exhibition where I submitted my photographs. Around the world, the wild crane population is 1,830, but more than 90% of these wild cranes come to the Korean peninsula
그래서
during the winter.
거의 8-90% 정도
So about 80 to 90% of these endangered wild cranes come to the Korean peninsula. And they would come down to the Korean peninsula around October, and they stay there for about 6 months, and they leave in March.
세계적으로도
And Cheolwon, Yeoncheon, and Paju, these areas are where you can find large groups of cranes. And the DMZ is the only area where you can find not only just regular cranes, but also white-naped cranes.
까지 248km
As you may know,
북쪽으로 2km
we have 280 kilometers of the line, and there are 4 kilometers wide.
서쪽으로 경기도 쪽
On the left-hand side, to the west, we have the plains,
서식하고 있습니다.
where you can find a lot of birds. And on the right, or to the east, there are many mountains, so you can find rare animals. The DMZ area only account for 1.1% of the total territory, but they account for 16% of the biology, and there is a high biodiversity.
어,
The UNESCO Biosphere Preservation Area has been designated for this DMZ area, especially Yeoncheon and the Gangwon province border area. These have been designated as UNESCO Biosphere Preservation Area. And
유네스코 생물권 보존지구로 지정이 돼 있어.
and also we have the Seolak Mountain
이때는
designated for biosphere protection.
지정
So all in all, many parts of Gangwon province are covered.
기반이 마련돼 있다고 봤습니다.
So we do have already a foundation for sustainable DMZ tourism. When you look at this Korean Peninsula new economy map, the DMZ area is designated as tourist belt.
금강산, 설악
We have the mountains, including Seolak Mountain and Geumgangsan, and we also have the border area. So there's this horizontal and vertical lines connecting. And we can further participate and promote tripartite tourist destinations together with China and Russia. In order to ensure that DMZ tourism becomes sustainable, we need to continue to develop tourist contents and tourist attractions, and we need the participation of the local communities to make sure that there will be revenue going back to the residents.
일관성 있게
We need to put together a plan to develop and preserve the DMZ area for tourism and also for bioprotection.
지금 보고 계신 사진은
The photo that you see here is really well known. This is called the Grunest Bond in Germany.
원래 논의를 했었는데
There was discussion about this idea before the unification, but there was sudden unification. And after unification, a environmental group called Wundt
펼쳐가지고
carried out this project in Germany to create this green belt
과거의 그런 분단
that signifies the history of division, and they turned this area into a biological green ecological area where a lot of tourists will visit here. They will take a long walk, they will ride a bicycle, and this has become a symbol of unification and peace.
독일 그리네스 반트
I believe that we can benchmark Grunest Bond in Germany to turn our DMZ into a sustainable tourist attraction for peace and for ecology. And we can turn the borderline for Cold War into an area for peace and life. Thank you for your attention.
예,
So this was the first presentation by Park Kyungman.
DMZ 협력에 관련된
He discussed
결론이었던 것 같아요.
the inter-Korean cooperation for tourism. I believe that was his conclusion because the DMZ area is actually already designated as UNESCO Biosphere Protection Area, and
공간으로
we can utilize the DMZ as a place for peace and ecology.
잠깐 우리 첫 번째 발제를 해주신
Now,
제가
I would like to introduce our first speaker once again. He is a journalist, but he's also an expert ecologist. And I can even say that he's a DMZ expert.
지속 가능한
And recently, he's been studying the DMZ and its utilization for ecology, and he earned a PhD at his this late age. Thank you, and it was a great work.
모두 듣고
We are going to have a panel discussion after the second presentation is over.
The second presentation is titled PyeongChang Winter Olympics and Inter-Korean Tourism Cooperation, and it will be presented by Professor SHIM Sangjin. We look forward to your presentation.
타이머를 좀 세팅을 해놓고
I will set my timer so that I keep within the time. Good morning. It is a very cold morning, but despite the cold weather, thank you very much for joining us today. I have been asked to talk about inter-Korean tourism and revenue models for inter-Korean tourism. And so, since many people are talking about sports in other sessions, I would like to concentrate on tourism. And because I'm going to talk about revenue models, I'm going to give you a lot of numbers, but due to the time constraint, I will try to keep it as short as possible. Let me jump to the conclusion. Inter-Korean sports cooperation and inter-Korean tourism cooperation is not a choice, it is a must. In order for the Republic of Korea to survive, in order for North Korea to survive, in order for the Korean Peninsula to survive, this is our only choice. As Mr. Park has mentioned in his presentation, we need to connect land, sea, and air, and we need to have exchanges between the two Koreas. And these exchanges will become sports exchanges and tourism exchanges, which will then lead to the development of both Koreas. So these are the four topics that I will be covering. Well, as you're well aware, the inter-Korean issue is the fundamental issue on the Korean Peninsula. We need to create peace, maintain peace. We need to have exchanges. We need to solve the issue of separated families. And that actually lays down the foundation for unification. Everyone here today wishes for this.
우리는 물리적 분단만 생각하지만은
We always think about physical separation, but separation in itself not only physically separates land, but it also separates people, families, and communities. It also separates our thoughts, our views of the world, and our personalities.
해야 될 텐데
We need to reconnect with North Korea. But as you can see on the very bottom, North Korea is now a very unfamiliar country to us. Let me give you one quiz question. Cut out in this area. If we translate that to South Korean, it means to cut out a certain part. But if we translate this into North Korean language, it means this part has to be axed out. And so the language is becoming very different. And so we need to have this understanding in order to understand North Korea. Here you can see the translation in the North Korean language. So we're talking about economy in this session. So let me start with economy. Last November, this was reported on YTN. We can see that South Korea has reached the 10th largest economy and 8th largest trade volume. And according to ADB, this is the prospect for South Korea in the future. But even if our economy continues to develop, our peace index keeps us at rank 48. Let's see who's near us.
라오스,
Laos,
세르비아,
Serbia,
그 다음에는 잘
and
보도 못하던 나라들입니다.
countries that we've not even heard of.
그걸 보시면
And you can see that Japan, their economy is 3 times as large as our economy, and they are ranked 9th in terms of the peace index. Our ranking fell to 57 in 2021. North Korea is at 151. Look at the countries surrounding us. Our economy continues to develop, but if our peace index remains here, we cannot enjoy the fruits of our development.
타임지에
When Trump stepped into office, on the Times cover, there was this title, The Twins. It's because they're quite similar.
여러분들 보면은 오른쪽 사진
On the right side, you can see that this is how Trump will age, and this is also how Kim Jong-un will age. So they actually have good chemistry, and so they could have used that good chemistry, but they didn't. So right after Trump took office, what happened? This was before the PyeongChang Winter Olympics. Tension was heightening on the Korean Peninsula.
한 번도 본 적이 없는
President Trump said North Korea will be met with fire and fury. At the UN, his speech, he said, if we are forced to defend ourselves or our allies, we have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea. That's what Trump said in the UN. And if we take a look at the Ukraine situation, you know what a big influence this had on South Korea. If there was a war that broke out on the Korean Peninsula, the direct damage would not be on the US, but on South Korea. I will not use this video because of the time constraint. This video talks about how Trump was prepared to attack North Korea. But sports played an effective role in bringing reconciliation between the two Koreas. And during the 2018 PyeongChang Winter Olympics, we were able to open the 3 Inter-Korean Summit, the 2 DPRK US Summit, and we were also able to participate as a single team at the 2018 Jakarta Asian Games. I also participated in PyeongChang and also in Jakarta.
감동적인
It was quite moving because the
상사 주재원들과
employees and the family members of the North Korean embassy in Jakarta joined the South Koreans to cheer our single team. But after that, you can see that we did have a series of very hopeful events. But
모멘텀이
all of this good momentum did not continue. Take a good look.
2018
In 2018, during the PyeongChang Winter Olympics, there was 0 missile launches. This year, we already have 7.
11발을 쏘았는데요.
They actually had 7 in the first 2 months of this year. Do we need to continue our dialogue with North Korea when North Korea is doing this? Is peace possible between the two Koreas? Well, Nelson Mandela already gave us the answer. It always seems impossible until it's done. And President Joohyeong had said, "Hey, have you tried this before?" That's what the former chairman of Hyundai Motors said. So, what makes the impossible possible? Sports and tourism, I believe, can make the impossible possible, based on what I have experienced already. Why is North Korea interested in tourism? On the Korean Peninsula, we always talk about the inter-Korean relations, creating jobs, our economy, overcoming the Korean discount. And can we solve all of this through inter-Korean tourism? Many researchers believe yes, we can find a solution through tourism. And tourism is the world's 3rd largest export category above automotive products.
유엔에서는 이미 1960
And already in 1967, UN has mentioned that tourism is a driver of peace.
as a driver of peace.
The World Tourism Organization has mentioned that tourism indeed propels economic development,
무역도 촉진,
and it could also drive trade, encourages investment, and it also helps develop infrastructure and services. That's what tourism can do. And if we take a look at academic papers,
가져오냐 하는 연구들을
does tourism actually lead to peace?
개국을 대상으로 한 건데
According to research of 126 countries,
러시아 케이스를 가져왔습니다.
I want to use a data from Russia. The higher the number of tourists, the lower the possibility of war.
코로나가 없어서
If we did not have COVID-19, and if there were tourists going back and forth between Ukraine and Russia, and if we were able to visit Moscow or Vladivostok as tourists, I believe that the current situation would not be ongoing. And there are other academic papers verifying the original papers. Does tourism really lead to peace? This
데이터베이스를 가지고 있어요.
paper is based on 111 different countries, and it shows that there is a direct correlations. Peace through tourism, it says peace tourism intends to reduce root causes that create situations where violence has been perceived as inevitable. So it actually reduces root causes of violence.
또 하나는 그 우리 통계청 자료인데요.
And this is from the Korean Statistical Office.
가장 하고 싶은 것이
7 out of 10 adults have a bucket list, and on the bucket list you can see getting married, buying a home, and they're in somewhere around the 30% range, but travel has 70%. So, on the top of the bucket list for Korean adults is traveling. And according to Professor Shin In-chul of Seoul National University, who analyzed 500 data points, what gives joy and meaning to life of people? Of course, you can date, or you can go to church, you can eat, you can take care of your children,
요리하고
you can cook, you can volunteer, you can do all of these things. But you can see travel is at the top right corner. So travel gives the most joy and meaning to people's lives. And when people are asked, what do you want to do after COVID-19? Everyone said travel. What is important here
표시되어 있는 숫자
is that the number in the box
관광 산업이
shows the percentage of the GDP in tourism. In Saudi Arabia, they have a large oil industry, but after they run out of oil, they want to live off tourism. This is the same for China. 10.9% of their GDP. The Israel-Palestine conflict area, I've been to Jordan, and I could see that the soldiers, they're holding their guns, but they're also looking at their smartphones because there's a lot of tourists there. In Israel, they have a great soft industry, they have a great fourth industrial revolution going on, but still they're very much interested in tourism. In Japan, it's 7.5%. University students in Japan, they want to be hired by tourism agencies. And even now, I wanted to ask, even with COVID-19, well, I heard that even now the university students want to be employed by tourism agencies. That's how important tourism is in all countries around the world. What about North Korea? Mr. Park gave us a lot of examples in his presentation. Well, Kim Jong-un studied in Switzerland, and he is determined to feed the people of North Korea through tourism. He's developing Wonsan and Geumgangsan as an international MICE center. And in his New Year's speech of 2019, he has mentioned this. And not only Kim Jong-un, but his father,
2008년부터 꾸준하게
since 2008, has continued to emphasize tourism.
자기네들 나름대로
And so they have a lot of plans.
크루즈를 통해서
And what they want to do is to invite South Korean tourists to North Korea on cruises.
신문에서
And in the North Korean papers, there are many articles on tourism. Particularly recently, there are more articles.
북한 대사가 직접 발표를 한
And the North Korean ambassador to the US has mentioned various things. And for the first time, he opened information about tourism. Well, you can see that it's only 2.8%. Well, the advanced countries, they have 7 to 9%, but in Korea, we only have 2.8%. And in North Korea, they have a non-existent tourism industry.
제출한 것을 보면
And according to what North Korea has submitted to the UN, in order to facilitate the development of tourism, they have different government bodies, and they are completely concentrating on developing their tourism industry.
강원 프로빈스를 컨버티드
What they want to do is convert the Gangwon province into a tourist area. And they want to make sure that Gangwon province can live off tourism, just like the Gangwon province of South Korea is imagining. Here you can see the ski slopes of Masingnyeong and also Yongpyeong, so one in North Korea and one in South Korea. So you can see that they are concentrating on tourism. And in the past, this was an area for military exercises, but this is what's happening. I do have a lot of pictures, but I will skip through them. And I actually got this off Google, and the coast in Kalma is 6.5 kilometers, and the coast in Haeundae, which is a well-known beach in Korea, is 2 kilometers. So the Kalma coastal area is very long. And if we take a look at the airport, they want to connect Wonsan and Geumgangsan. So the tourists of South Korea can go to Geumgangsan, and they can be brought up to Wonsan using this route, and then the international tourists coming to Wonsan can be brought down to Geumgangsan using this route. And if we take a look at scholars studying North Korea, there's a lot of papers on tourism. In the past, there were no papers on tourism, but now we see a lot of papers on tourism. And you can see that the titles makes us confused. It actually confuses us to think about whether this is written by South Korean scholars or North Korean scholars, but in fact this list is from North Korean scholars. And on January 1st of 2022 this year, a professor at Kim Il-sung University actually wrote a paper on tourism. This includes a plan on how they're going to develop their tourism. And on the bottom, you can see that Chairman Kim Jong-un has emphasized the development of tourism assets on numerous occasions, and that is why an economy major at the University of Kim Il-sung University is now studying tourism. So this is something that the two Koreas should work on together. If we take a look at the plan of North Korea, they hope to invite 1 to 1.2 million people to Wonsan every year. But Air Korea only has 5 to 9 flights per week, which means that they can only fly 100,000 people per year. So that's where we need to step in. The Telegraph actually had a very bold title. the world's busiest air route? You'll never guess.
가장 바쁘게 움직이는
So what is the world's busiest air route? You will never guess. That was a title. And the answer is the route between Gimpo in Seoul and Jeju Island. That is the busiest route in the world. And this is the number for this year, according to Kappa. This is a center for aviation.
제주하고 서울이
So the route connecting Seoul and Jeju, that was the busiest route. What is quite amazing is that even under COVID-19, these figures continued. That is how busy this route is.
저가
Korean Air and many low-cost carriers are flying this route.
왔다 갔다 하고 있는 거예요.
15 million people fly from Seoul to Jeju every year.
관심을 둬야 되고 싶어요.
So we need to focus on Vladivostok.
한국에서 떠나는 비행기가
And there are 40 flights flying from Korea to Vladivostok. This can actually fly 350,000 people per year.
인원이 관광 인원이
We can see that in just 5 years, the number of tourists going to Vladivostok grew by fivefold. If we open Wonsan, we believe that tourism will rocket to Wonsan. So here are the details.
얼마나 촘촘한
You can see that there are watertight UN sanctions against North Korea, but sport and tourism is not included. So that is where we need to work on. So here is the expected revenues from tourism, and here are a lot of details. So in a nutshell, once North Korea opens,
북한에서는
they will be able to earn $175 million just from South Korean tourists going to North Korea.
북한까지 가게 되면
So if we have 1.17 million tourists going there, that's how much they will earn. And if they make a peaceful atmosphere, then this number can skyrocket to $350 million for North Korea. But we also need to take into consideration the US sanctions and the UN sanctions.
미국에서 북한을
In the US,
경제 제재를 하기 시작한 것이 이 법안입니다.
this law started off all of the sanctions, and it was a bipartisan support, 419 for the sanction and only 11 against the sanction. And I actually looked up this law.
그렇지만은 우리가 그 하원을 욕만 할 수가 없는
Well, we cannot blame them because even with all of the sanctions,
생션을 보면은
if we take a look at sanction number 826,
괜히 하는 것을 또 법안을 붙여
Divided Families Reunification Act was included, and 100 people actually agreed with this law. So even with all of these sanctions, the US believes that divided families should be reunited. We need to focus on these points. So in order for Chairman Kim to get what he wants, we need peace on the Korean Peninsula and we need inter-Korean cooperation. And that is the same for South Korea as well. We need peaceful coexistence with North Korea. So we are at an economy session. So I brought these figures.
IMF 때 시작을 했어요.
Well, the Geumgangsan tourism started during the economic crisis of 97. And with improvements in the inter-Korean
굉장히 떨어.
relations, the spread for loans actually dropped. And that is a very
자, 우리 위치에 중
detailed economic effect.
$100 거기서
We have a foreign loan about $600 million. And if we become someone like Ukraine,
스프레드
and if that causes the spread to go up by 0.01% point, then that actually will mean that we will have to spend $6 billion more on interest. But if we can spend that on peace, then we can actually bring the spread down for our loans. Many people worry about Russia.
이자율에서 9.7
They actually had an interest rate that spiked to 9.7% from 7.5%. This actually could happen to us.
절하되는
The ruble was depreciated for a long time,
5년
and If we compare the won to ruble, we can see that we show quite similar trends.
우리가 러시아
So we should not be worrying about Russia at this point in time.
노스코리아 디스카운트가 왜
The North Korea discount does exist. Why?
그 환율하고 그런 걸 비율을
Because we need to compare our situation with Russia. So we have the 10th largest economy, but Russia is 11th.
러시아가 우리보다
In 2009, Russia was one step ahead of us. So our economic volume is quite similar with Russia. And we can see Russia's ruble being depreciated, and so is won being depreciated. Here's a great report from Goldman Sachs.
보도가
But this is not reported all that often. In 2010, the chairman of Goldman Sachs issued a report. He said Korea will be among the world's top 10 countries between 2010 and 2019. That was actually very accurate. But if we look at the purchase power,
인도네시아
in the next 3 decades, Korea will not enjoy those lofty status. We will be behind Indonesia, the Philippines, and even Nigeria in 2050. That is quite a shocking prediction.
필리핀과 인도네시아
And we will actually be behind Turkey, Indonesia, and India. We will fall behind these countries.
자, 앞에서 말씀드렸지만 우리 관광 산업이
Well, our tourism industry
규모에서는 굉장히 떨어지죠. 140
is very small. So of the 140 countries, our competitive power is number 16, but tourism is only at the bottom. It's a 51. And so it's actually a field that we have room for improvement in. And North Korea really wants to develop their tourism. And it is not under the UN sanction. And
회사에 따라서
we do not need taxpayers' money because individuals will pay for their own tours to North Korea.
전 세계 관광 경쟁
Spain has the number 1 tourism competitive power in the world. But Spain envies
전체 합쳐봐야 인구가
this country.
밖에 안 되고
Well, across Europe, there's 440 million people living there. And
그런데도 스페인은
across Europe, there are
2019년에
83 million visitors coming to Spain, and we actually have 17 million coming to Spain. And we only have 2.8% of our GDP created from tourism. But in Spain, it's almost 15%. But Spain still envies one country. Spain envies Korea
중국하고 일본
because
월드 GDP를 보면은
if we take a look at the world GDP of China and Japan, it's 20 times the GDP of Korea. And if we take a look at the population, they have 30 times more people living in China and Japan compared to Korea. And the only country in the world that can connect China and Japan is South Korea and North Korea. So Spain envies us. If we do not reconnect with North Korea, we're basically an island. Are we going to remain an island? Please read this book.
정말 남북 경협을 해서
We need to think about the benefits of inter-Korean economic cooperation. We benefit more compared to North Korea. Well, we are always disappointed. We had 3 inter-Korean summits, we had 2 USDPRK summits, but it didn't work out. But you need to think about this.
실망하지 말자 하는 얘기죠.
Better and bad, and at the same time, we need to think about what we will do from here. It took us 32 years to change from 110-volt electricity to 220-volt electricity.
금방 될까요?
But that's how systems take a long time to change. And so, we need to continue consistently with sports exchanges and tourism exchanges,
남북 관계를 개선하는데
and inter-Korean sports cooperation will become a leverage for inter-Korean relations.
성의를 보이면은
And if North Korea reaches out, then they can actually earn $350 million from tourism. Well, they actually had less than $300 million in exports from the whole country in the whole year, from everything. And so that is why they're so focused on tourism. If sports exchanges go well, tourism will develop, and they will create a virtuous cycle of sports and tourism. And we do not have to invest taxpayers' money.
각자 가면은 됩니다.
We now need to travel as individuals. What kind of a Korean peninsula do we want to leave for our children?
2050년
Do we want to leave a Korean peninsula that falls behind the Philippines, Nigeria, and Indonesia, as the chairman of Goldman Sachs has predicted in 2050? Or do we want to leave our children with a more developed country? We have North Korea and South Korea on the Korean peninsula. We are in it together, but together we can become stronger. Sports exchanges and tourism projects is a small window for unification. Let us make sure that we do not close this window. Let us all gather our wisdom to keep this window open. Thank you very much.
예, 발제 잘 들었습니다.
Thank you for your presentation.
남북 관광이
Inter-Korean tourism is not an option, it is a must.
100% 동의합니다.
I completely agree with that statement.
심상진 교수님은
Professor Shim
그룹의 아산에 오래 근무하셨어요.
worked at the Hyundai Group for a very long time, and
산 증인이
he is the living witness to the Geumgangsan tourism project. And after leaving Hyundai, he has become a professor, and he continues to write academic papers on inter-Korean tourism. Thank you very much.
지금 그 오늘
Now we have two designated panel members. The first one is Jim Rogers. Before I introduced him, I thought about this. Why did we or the organizers decide to invite Jim Rogers for this session? I think there are two reasons. First of all, Chairman Rogers has been talking about the very positive and optimistic outlook for the Korean Peninsula when we do not have the division any longer, because this will lead to alleviation of tensions, military tensions, and we can save on military spending when the division is over and when we're united. And if we use that money to invest in education and economy, then the two Koreas can prosper and the benefits will be maximal. I think that is why what Rogers has been arguing. That is the first reason. And the second reason is that, as far as I know, Jim Rogers, he likes to travel around the world, and he recommended his daughter to go to a college far, far away from home, because it is important to travel around and deepen your understanding. And traveling and tourism is indeed very educational. And I believe that is why he has been invited to this session, because he has full of insights and he has extensive understanding about the world and also about the Korean Peninsula. So let me now invite Chairman Rogers to comment on the two presentations.
Sorry, thank you very much. I'm not sure why I was invited either. I've been to North Korea twice. It may have something to do with it. But it's now illegal for Americans to go to North Korea, not because of North Korea, but because of America. It's illegal for South Koreans to go. It's illegal for Japanese to go. These are countries which would probably send a lot of people to North Korea if our own countries didn't close it off. But we've talked about inter-Korean tourism. I would just like to talk about international tourism for a moment. If you look at the world tourism map, Korea, Hanbando, has never been on the world tourism map for historical reasons, war, Japan, North Korea, etc. But but when we open the 30th parallel, when the DMZ is open, there is going to be a gigantic boom in Korean tourism, because nobody's ever been here. Nobody has ever come for many reasons. But once it's open, Korea is going to be probably the most exciting tourism place in the world. Many people want to come and say, what is it? What is North Korea? What is South Korea? Because nobody's ever been here, nobody's ever thought about it. But I assure you, when they come, they're going to see lots of natural sites, man-made sites, temples, many, many things that will interest people. Food. Many people like Korean food. I'm not keen on Korean food, but a lot of people love Korean food. So Hanbando is going to be unbelievably exciting tourism destination for international tourists once you get rid of the 38th parallel. So I urge you, that's a different discussion, but as far as I can see, this will be the single most exciting tourism destination in the world once it's possible for international tourists to come. You do have to change some things. As you know, Korea was historically called the Hermit Kingdom because you closed off, you didn't like foreigners. You still don't particularly like foreigners. I mean, if I go to the ATM machine here and use my international credit card, even though the ATM machine says international credit, I cannot use it. A major international bank, and I cannot use the credit card at a Korean ATM. Likewise at Incheon Airport. So you do have to make more changes in your own mentality and open up more to the world. But once the DMZ is gone, this is going to be the single most exciting tourism place in the world. And all of the people involved in tourism are going to be very rich.
예, 고맙습니다.
Thank you very much.
대장님께서 여기 말고도
Well, Chairman Rogers had numerous interviews,
38선이 없다면
and on his interviews, he always talked about if the 38th parallel would open, there would be a very hopeful future for the Korean Peninsula. Next, we will be inviting
교수님은 동서대학
Professor Lee Chuljin of Dongseo University. Professor,
네, 반갑습니다. 동서대학교
pleased to meet you. I am Lee Chuljin of Dongseo University.
평화 포럼을
So we are here at the PyeongChang Peace Forum, and thank you very much for this invitation. It's a great honor for me to join the forum,
글로벌
and it is a great honor for me to sit next to Chairman Jim Rogers. I feel like I can't breathe. I'm so honored to be sitting next to you.
말씀들을 잘 드릴 수 있을지
I am worried about what I have to say is sufficient. Well, we can see that we had two great presentations,
이 부분에 대해서 제가 조금 첨언
and I would like to try and add to the presentations.
핵심 콘텐츠는
In the end, the core content of what the two Koreas can do together is tourism. And sports can actually facilitate the development of tourism.
그 도지사님께도
And thank you to the governor for always making these contributions. So for the two Koreas to become one in tourism
투어라고 하는
is not limited just to domestic tourism, but we can also open the market to global inbound tourism. So I do believe that there are great opportunities. We talked about the DMZ during the first presentation, and many people are also interested in dark tourism. For example, tourism to areas that used to have wars in the past, for education. So many people are interested in dark tourism these days. And if we could connect our tourism belt to Wonsan of North Korea, it could be used as a tourism route in the beginning, but then it could become a route for cultural exchanges in the future. And I can relate to the presentations concerning these points. But as a panelist, I would like to share my concerns.
그대로 받아들여질 수 있는가에 대한
I worry about until when can these topics be accepted. So we are worried about unification and we want to lead tourism, but this is all being done by the older generations, those who have heard from those who have experienced the Korean War. But times are changing.
MG 세대라고
We have the Gen MZs.
우리가 이렇게 하고
And so we are preparing for unification and tourism, but will the MZs be able to relate to these topics? I think we have to worry about this. From that perspective, I think a good answer would be an approach using sports. And so that's why sports is a great opportunity.
이야기를 해보면
If we are to talk about different generations, well, Professor Shim in his presentation talked about what kind of a Korean peninsula do we want to leave our children.
제게 느껴지더라고요. 근데 이러한 부분이
But concerning this point,
이게 올바른 방향인가에 대한
we have to think about what is the right direction for the next generations. The MZs, as you're well aware, they are not interested in the political ideologies. And they are actually free from these political paradigms. And because they are free from political paradigms, they don't think of North Korea as a country that we need to engage to achieve unification. They don't have these grand goals.
수 있는 형제의
But they may view North Korea as a close neighbor, a partner that we may work with for our future. But there are more MZs that believe, why do we have to share what we have with North Korea?
기성세대라고 하는 우리가
And so the older generation
이런 내용들을 알고 있는
who are aware of what happened on the Korean Peninsula should be shared with the MZs. And we need to find a platform for the MZs of the two Koreas to find common ground. And I believe that that's a new culture that the MZs can create. We shouldn't be creating our culture and asking the MZs to participate, but rather we need to leave it up to the MZs to create their own culture. And so we need to create a platform to enable the MZs to create their own culture.
무엇을 해가 아니라
We shouldn't be saying, this is what you have to do, but we should be saying, we're going to leave it up to you to create something new. The culture of the two Koreas can be created by you. So that is what we should be saying to the MZs.
사실은 너무 긴장되는 자리라 제가 무슨
Well, I feel quite nervous, so I don't even know what I'm saying.
마지막으로 토론의 그 후말비에
And
부분과 또 어렵게
rounding up the panel,
여쭤본
I do have questions for the presenters and Chairman Rogers.
기자님
My first question goes to Mr. Park.
되게 좋은 개발
Well, thank you very much for talking about the DMZ. When we think about peace, security, and ecotourism, these are very important keywords.
나라의 관광에
And DMZ will indeed become an important part of tourism. But what do we need to prepare now to make sure that tourism is at the center of tourism? DMZ is at the center of tourism. My next question goes to Professor Shim. You talked about economic cooperation between the two Koreas. Many people are concerned
그 정치적인
about the political situation of North Korea. For example, terrorism or aggravations and UN sanctions.
잘 끌어안고 갈 수 있는 혹은
So,
예상되는 어떤
what do you believe are some roadblocks in engaging with North Korea?
어렵게 뵙게 되는데
My question goes to Chairman Rogers because it's not a common chance that we get to meet him in person. So, North Korea, from an investment perspective, many people say that North Korea is a lottery ticket that hasn't been scratched yet. So that's how much potential North Korea has. Do you agree with this viewpoint? What are some of the investment value of North Korea? What is their identity in terms of investment value? We look forward to your precious opinions. Thank you very much.
그러면
Okay, so in the order of the questions, or should Jim go first?
아 그래요? 예.
Okay, then I'm going to invite reporter Park. The question to Dr. Park was about the priority preparations. What do we need to prepare now for tourism in North Korea.
아마도 지금 당장 DMZ
In my understanding, I do not think that we can make a DMZ an international tourist attraction now because it is under the authority of the UN commander. So even if you are, let's say, head of state or minister of defense, you cannot enter the DMZ without the permission from the UN command.
의원단이 고성
And recently, there was an attempt to visit Guwolsan for sporters, but there was no permission. And then that was in 2018, and there was this plan to visit the Daesungdong village inside the DMZ, visited by the Minister of Unification, but it was not allowed by the UN commander.
북한을 관광하는 계획
Therefore,
검토를 하고 추진을 했었는데
even though the government wanted to pursue a program where individuals could visit or travel the DMZ, this initiative was not approved by the UN.
라고 지금 하고 있습니다.
So these are the situations right now.
미국이죠.
Indeed, the UN command is practically controlled by the US. But as you may know, the Armistice Treaty was signed by the UN command.
관광은 여전히
So as long as the Armistice Agreement is in place, there may be a lot of constraints and limitations. And that is why we need to really work hard to turn this Armistice Treaty into a peace treaty.
연합사령관과 유엔군
And the UN commander is actually the chief commander of the US forces in Korea, the combined forces.
강화를 하려고
And the US wishes to expand its influence on the Korean peninsula, especially in South Korea, to keep China in check. So there are these efforts made by the US. Therefore, given these situations,
바꾸지 않은
unless we successfully change an armistice treaty into a peace treaty, we won't be able to pursue our goal right now, but we still need to make preparations. We may not be able to do much in the northern side of the DMZ border area, but there's a lot more we can do on the southern part of the DMZ. There's a lot of pressure for development
수도권과 가까운
in the areas such as Paju and Gimpo and Yeoncheon. They are closer to the metropolitan area, so there's a lot of pressure and demand for development. And there are plans under review for construction, road construction, and other development.
논습지를 매립해서
And also there are some projects going on to convert unused lands into land sites for livestock and photovoltaic power generation and other economic activities. So there has been ongoing destruction of these areas around the metropolitan area. But I believe that we need to pursue peace tourism and ecotourism in the DMZ area,
거의 한반도에서 유일한 공간이
because the DMZ area is the only area where we can promote peace and ecology at the same time.
볼 것도 없다라고 하는 사람들도
Some may say that there's nothing much to see or experience in the DMZ. Therefore, I think that we need to develop tourist content and attractions, and we need to develop tourist programs to increase the attractiveness of the DMZ area for tourists. In Paju, you can go to Imjingak. This is a place where you can observe North Korea, and there are a lot of festivals at the Imjingak, but
전혀
the surrounding villages and the residents are not really interested in these festivals because these festivals and tour programs do not benefit the local residents directly. I think we need to make sure that the benefits of such tourism will be shared by the local residents as well. Thank you.
제가 어제
Well, yesterday
세션 하나를 들어갔었어요.
I participated on the session on Korean Peninsula Peace and Gangwon Province, and a similar question was raised related to the management of the DMZ area.
통화 체제로 전환되어야만
Well, we need to first have a peace regime in order to well manage the DMZ. If we approach it with this perspective, then it will take a long time.
전환하는데 굉장히
Currently, there are many difficulties in establishing a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula.
관리권 회수에 대한
And so, we need to first focus on
우선 인식
getting back our rights to manage the DMZ area. So we need to share information related to this, and we need to have programs to advocate for this, and we need to have seminars to build consensus. And so after we do the consensus building, we need to work with the UN because the UN has to make that decision.
한다든가 해서
We can petition or we could do other areas so that we can win back the right to manage the DMZ.
기자님 얘기했던 그
Mr. Park, he talked about ways to peacefully utilize the DMZ area, and so we need to work from that approach. Why don't we now go to Professor SHIM for the answer? Well, I think there are two questions in that question. First, about the MZs,
태도나 생각에 대해서 얘기를 하시는데요.
their thoughts on North Korea. Well, the MZs, they're very important because the MZs will be our future. And they have no understanding of North Korea. They have not been given opportunity to learn about North Korea. And according to statistics, during the times of Mount Geumgang,
갔다 와서
those who had negative aspects about North Korea, once they visited Mount Geumgang, 70 to 80% of them changed their mind and had positive thoughts about North Korea. They could see that North Korea was a partner that we have to work with. Of course, there are some people who had even more negative thoughts after traveling to North Korea, but 70 to 80% changed their mind. The MZs, they are very wise. And so, if they are given opportunities to travel to North Korea, they will go and see for themselves and make up their own minds. I don't think we should force an answer upon them. The MZs should be given an opportunity to go and see for themselves, and that opportunity should be created by the older generations. You talked about UN sanctions. We have to think about how to work with these sanctions. Under the UN sanctions, tourism is not included. But how do the sanctions work? For example, ships, the airplanes that go to North Korea, they are banned from using in 6 months. So once a ship goes to North Korea, then they are banned from going to the US for 6 months. That would be a big influence on Korean Air or Asiana Air. But there's also Fly Gangwon, a low-cost carrier in Gangwon province. But Fly Gangwon will never fly to the US, and so the sanctions will not be applied to them. And we can actually walk across to North Korea. Of course, there are issues with the DMZ, but it's possible. So if we have the will, then we can find solutions.
그 거대한 나라에서
South Korea
저가 항공회사보다
has more LCCs compared to the whole of the US. And we also have the busiest route in the world. So Fly Gangwon can fly back and forth between the two Koreas. And if a North Korea ship would come from Wonsan to Geumgang to Sokcho, that's okay because North Korean ships cannot go to the US anyway. And as I have presented in my presentation, there is one precondition by North Korea.
가지고서 주변 국가
They should not threaten their neighbors with weapons. They should not arrest tourists. If they do not do these two things, they can open $350 million for inter-Korean tourism, and this can grow by twofold if we have international tourism. We only have 2.8% of our GDP, which is made up of tourism. This can grow to 10% with tourism that opens with North Korea. Well, according to the UN statistics, tourism is a bigger industry compared to automotive products. We need to keep this in mind. Thank you very much.
아까 그
Thank you.
로저스 프레지던트께 여쭤본 게
So the question to Chairman Rogers was benefits of investing in North Korea, right? Then, Mr. Rogers, I would like to add one more question to you.
북한 채권을 갖고 계십니다.
Do you hold any bonds issued by North Korea? If it's not a business secret, I wonder if you have any exposure to North Korean fixed income.
To answer your question first, no, I do not own any North Korean bonds. First of all, I'm an American, so it would be illegal for me to, and I cannot find those bonds. I know that they used to exist, and they used to trade, but if they're out there, they're very few now, and I cannot, I would like to buy them. I would like to buy them, but I'm an American citizen, so I'm not allowed to buy them if I could find them. But back to some other questions. You mentioned before that the young people in Korea, South Korea, do not want to share with North Korea. Let me tell you, there's nothing to share. North Korea spends staggering amounts of money on defense. South Korea spends billions of dollars on defense. If you didn't have to spend money on guns and tanks and bullets, there would be billions and billions and billions of dollars that you could spend on other things. So the young people don't have to share with North Korea. They're going to have a lot more money. They can build highways, hospitals, factories, discos, whatever they want to spend the money on. So stop worrying about sharing with North Korea. You're going to have a lot of money, and they're going to have a lot of money to spend on other things. Now, you ask about the blockages to all this. I want to tell you that Russia's for this, China's for this, North Korea is for this, many people in South Korea are for this, Japan is against it. Japan knows they cannot compete with an open Korea Peninsula, so they want to stop it, but they cannot stop it as hard as they try. The only problem is the U.S. Army, or the UN command, as you call it. The U.S. Army does not want to leave because this is the only place they can keep troops on the Russian border and the Chinese border. Now, that's not good for Korea. It's not good for me because I'm a taxpayer in America. But if there's war, even if America goes to war with Ukraine, you're going to be in the war because you've got all these American troops sitting here. And that's causing, to me, it's causing a problem because as some of you have said, you have to ask the UN commander. You have been occupied by a foreign army for nearly 75 years. Most countries that are occupied by a foreign army want to get rid of the foreign army. But for some reason, you will not get rid of the occupying army. You've been here for several thousand years. You've had good times, you've had bad times. If I were you, and I'm not, but if I were you, I would say to the Americans, go home. We have been here a few thousand years. We can make our own mistakes. We don't need to ask you every time we want to do something. So the main blockage to all of this, as we were discussing before, as you asked, is the American Army. If I were you, I would get rid of them, which would lead to huge opportunities. I talked before about gigantic opportunities in international tourism. This could be an amazing tourism country, peninsula, but also there's transportation. There used to be railroads up the East Coast, railroads up the West Coast. They're being rebuilt. Agriculture in North Korea is a disaster. They need everything, but everything in North Korea is a disaster. They need everything, electricity, chairs, rugs, clothes, everything. So once it opens, once you open the DMZ, everything you can think of is an opportunity in North Korea. Go and open pizza places. They will love pizza. They will love everything. So the opportunities are unbelievable. I said before that once the DMZ is open, this is going to be the single most exciting country in the world for investment, for society, for everything. Not forever, but for 20 years, 30 years. This could be very, very exciting. Anything you're good at, anything they need in North Korea. The Kims and communism have ruined North Korea. So go there and get very, very rich. Young people, old people, sports people, all people. And did I answer your question?
예, 회장님 고맙습니다.
Thank you very much, Chairman, for your answer. It seems that we have less than 5 minutes left for this session.
그럼 플로어에서
So we will now take any questions from the floor. If you have any questions for our speakers or Chairman Rogers, perhaps, please wait for a microphone.
Very much. Andrew Salmon, Asia Times. My question is for Professor Shim. You mentioned correctly that sanctions do not apply to tourism. China sends millions of tourists to North Korea, and yet currently no tourism can go into North Korea due to COVID border closures. But tell me, why do you think the Moon Jae-in administration in 2018 and 2019 did not reopen tourism into North Korea prior to COVID? Thank you.
예, 질문은 제가
Yes, we understood the question. Let me answer in Korean.
지금
Well, concerning this point,
너무너무
this is a point that I find quite unfortunate.
유엔하고 미국 생션이
There are US sanctions and UN sanctions, but there was room for maneuver by the South Korean government. But it seems that we have missed that window.
사이에서 어떠한 전제
In the 2019 New Year address, there was a mentioning of starting without any conditions. And so we needed to work around the UN sanctions, and we needed to work around the US sanctions. And if we had done that, I think we could have reopened tourism. If we had actually sent one team up to North Korea, then we would have found issues, and then we could have solved those issues. But there was a lot of concerns by the South Korean government. We had to think about the UN, we had to think about the US, we had to think about possible secondary boycotts in world trade. And as we were taking time thinking, the sanctions of the US and UN became stronger and stronger. Well, because of COVID-19, all the borders have been closed. But after COVID-19,
소수로 듣고 있는
and according to various sources that I have, North Korea is completely concentrated on tourism. They are fixated on tourism because they have no other industry that can earn them as much as the whole of their trade that they are earning now. And if they open tourism, then we will have a much more peaceful atmosphere. And in order to do that, the attitude of North Korea has to change. I hope that was a sufficient answer to your question. Thank you.
제가 플로어
I would like to receive a couple of more questions from the floor, but we have to end the session in 2 minutes. So
질문으로
I believe that this has to be the end of the Q&A session. I'd like to ask for your understanding.
고맙습니다.
I'd like to thank the two presenters and the two panel members for their contribution. I would also like to thank the offline participants for coming here despite the cold weather outside.
이번 세션은 여기서
So with that, let me wrap up this economy session 1. Thank you very much for your participation.